Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, February 1st, 2019. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick, let's start off talking about Ohio State's 2019 football schedule. Steve Hellwagon did a story for the site yesterday, looking at game-by-game breakdown of the 2019 schedule. I look at it, obviously the non-conference schedule is not that tough for the Buckeyes. The Cincinnati game could be tough. When you look at Florida Atlantic, UC, and Miami of Ohio, not really a murderer's row. So I hear a lot of people saying, Ohio State has this really easy schedule in 2019. I'll push back on that a little bit because I look at the Big Ten schedule. It's not easy. They're crossover games at Nebraska, who I think is going to be much improved, at Northwestern, Wisconsin at home. Those are three tough crossover games. And then having to play Penn State and Michigan in back-to-back weeks in November. I am not a fan of that at all. Having to host Penn State and then travel to Michigan the very next week, not a fan of that. So it's not a brutal schedule, but I definitely do not think it's an easy schedule. What's your breakdown of the schedule, Patrick?
I agree with you. And I think we should remember that the TCU game last year was supposed to be part of a home and away series that would have made this schedule a little more desirable for fans. Obviously, when you move that to a neutral site, that takes away one of those games. So, I think that this schedule, non-conference, Florida Atlantic will be interesting, I think, just because of Lane Kiffin, and he makes things interesting from kind of a storyline standpoint and fans having interest. Obviously, that's the first game, so there'll always be some buzz about that. But I think week 2 at Cincinnati will be interesting. That's a team Ohio State should beat, but obviously Luke Fickell knows the Buckeyes well. He's got guys on his staff that know Ohio State pretty well. So, and he's put together a pretty talented team. So that's the early game, the non-conference game that maybe you circle as a kind of lookout game. But yeah, then Nebraska and Northwestern, those two games you mentioned. I think I've already seen people pointing to Nebraska as that potential slip-up game for the Buckeyes. Maybe not quite as bad as Iowa or Purdue, but in that similar vein. When I look at it, I think that's a game that Ohio State will be ready for with the way Nebraska kind of came on at the end of the year. Obviously going to Lincoln, a place that, despite Ohio State's recent trips, is difficult to play. I think that's a game that they'll know they need to bring it with, though I would have said that about Purdue last year. The Northwestern game, to me, is the interesting one. Obviously, they played in the Big Ten championship game this past year. Ohio State won that pretty comfortably. But, Northwestern will be out for revenge. Obviously, going to Evanston, the last time Ohio State was there, it wasn't exactly an easy trip. I imagine that will be a night game if Northwestern's any good at all. You could even see a repeat with with College Game Day. I don't know what else is that week, but I guess that's a Friday game, so that'll be a night game no matter what. So maybe not that much buzz, but there'll certainly be buzz about it, I think. And that'll be a tricky one. I think when you have to, make that Friday trip, that's not the orthodox week of preparation. Coming off a game with Michigan State, which could be tricky too. So those are probably the two road games I look at. And then obviously you mentioned the end of the season. We've seen that before, Michigan State and Michigan back-to-back weeks. I think it was 2015 when they lost to, 2015 when they lost to Michigan State at home and then had to go to Michigan the next week. So yeah, that'll be tricky. I don't imagine Penn State will be nearly as good as they have the last few years, but it's still Penn State. They'll still have weapons, and Ohio State will have to very much be ready for that. And, it doesn't make it easy to then prepare for Ryan Day's first trip to Ann Arbor as a head coach and first game against Michigan as a head coach. Obviously, the Michigan fans are hoping this is the year that they can get one over on Ohio State with Urban Meyer gone. So, I think there's definitely room for losses here and we'll see how Ohio State looks as we get closer to the season and whatnot. But that trip to Lincoln, that trip to Evanston, and then that Ann Arbor game, they're going to have to be on their A game, and we don't know exactly what this team will be like under Ryan Day. So, for a first schedule under a new head coach, I think it's relatively easy, but there are sections of the schedule where you could see slip-ups for sure.
No doubt about it. Yeah, well said on Penn State. Penn State, I don't think is going to be that good next year, but they'll find a way to play Ohio State tough. I guess.
Sure.
I mean, the game is in Columbus. That'll help. I know the last game in Columbus was really tight, but usually Ohio State takes care of business in Columbus fairly easily against Penn State. But I don't know. I just don't like playing Penn State and Michigan back-to-back weeks. But
yeah, that's tough.
Let's move on and talk about the defensive line for Ohio State in 2019. I did a piece for the site yesterday. I mean, this defensive line. I'm not saying the starting unit's going to be the best in college football, but I think 1 through 12, you're talking about the 3 deep, I think people would be hard-pressed to find a better defensive line than this. And it's nice they get to be coached up by arguably the best defensive line coach in the country, and Larry Johnson. I mean, you look at this group, Patrick, Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper returning at defensive end. You got Robert Landers returning at defensive tackle as a starter, and then Devon Hamilton, who graded out extremely well, is moving into a starting role. So they're the starters, and projected backups. This could change, but Tyreek Smith at one defensive end, Tyler Friday at the other defensive end. You got Tommy Togiai, Haskell Garrett, defensive tackle. And then the third team, this is where things get, life is good. You got Teron Vincent, projected as a third-team defensive tackle. I have Antoine Jackson in there as well as a third-teamer. And then at defensive end, on the third team, I had Jayshon Cornell, a fifth-year senior, another nice luxury to have him as a third-teamer. And then I have Javonte Jean-Baptiste moving up, as a redshirt freshman and cracking the 3 deep. So this, and that's leaving out guys like Zach Harrison, who's going to be, he'll be a true freshman. And Jerron Cage is going to be a third-year sophomore defensive tackle. Those guys didn't even make my projected 3 deep. This defensive line could be fantastic this fall.
Yeah, when you talk about the rotation that Ohio State has had in the past, a lot of times it's only rotating into the 2 deep. If they want to this year, as you just kind of broke down, they could go deeper than that. And, I don't know how deep, how comfortable Larry Johnson is to go that deep, just in terms of making sure guys get reps and stay in rhythm and whatnot. But there's certainly the depth there if there are, minor injuries and you need to pull some guys out for a temporary time, hopefully nothing long-term. But, or if you just want to, you want to get some guys experience, those third-team guys you mentioned, especially a guy like Jayshon Cornell. I can't imagine, unless he's just not bringing it in practice or not playing as well as, he can. That's a guy that I think is going to get reps, right? So, but I agree with you. I don't know if you put him ahead of a guy like Tyreek Smith or Tyler Friday. So that you have a luxury here, very much so. I think you've got to figure out the best way to use it, and I think that will be tricky. Obviously, you trust a guy like Larry Johnson to do just that. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've seen a defensive line this deep. Obviously, Clemson's was the one talked about this past year as one of the best ever. But they certainly didn't go this deep. And this all, is assuming that these guys continue to develop and turn into what we want. But the fact that you went 3 deep and didn't even put Zach Harrison on your list is showing how strong this is. I think he's a guy that they're going to want to get on the field, assuming he, is ready to go for his freshman year, obviously with the buzz and being a local kid and whatnot. If he can play, I think he sees snaps similar to a Joey Bosa when he first got here. But yeah, it's going to be tough for any of these guys, aside from the obvious starters, to kind of crack that rotation, just because of how deep this is going to be. And that's always good news for the Buckeyes.
Now, we're just going to spitball here just to let the listeners know, but I know a lot of people want to know about Justin Fields and the situation there now, especially now that we're in February, barely in February, but we're in February now. And we had heard that sometime this month is when he's likely to find out his fate from the NCAA. We know Ohio State is very optimistic. Alex Gleitman, who's taking a little bit of a sabbatical as he welcomes in his which I know that we're less than a week away from the due date of Gleitman Jr. So Alex Gleitman's taking a little bit of a sabbatical from the site.
Him and Aaron Kraft's son will be very close in age.
That's right. Aaron Kraft beat Alex to the punch, of course.
Yeah. Only because the baby came 2 weeks early, though.
See, Aaron Kraft doesn't mess around.
No.
So there you go. But yeah, I mean, Alex is still doing great work for us, even when he's not working. And Alex has reported that Ohio State is very optimistic. And I've heard the same thing. Ohio State is very optimistic Justin Fields is going to be eligible immediately. And I have to think Justin Fields knew that all along, or he wouldn't have made this, drastic step. And I know he's got a lawyer involved. But so I guess my take is I do expect him to learn sometime this month he is eligible immediately at Ohio State. And that'd be huge because not only would he be eligible immediately for the fall, but he's be able to go through all of spring practice and learn everything. I guess he'd probably be able to do that anyway now that I think about it. He'd be able to go through spring ball anyway. But still, it'd be nice to get that settled so in spring ball, okay, he's the QB1. Let's roll with him. I do think sometime this month he's going to find out his fate, and I think it's going to be he's eligible immediately at Ohio State.
I think it would be huge to hear that this month because, just like you said, he'll be able to go through spring practice, but it's different going through spring practice and knowing you're going to be the guy, knowing that you are eligible. Obviously, he believes that. Ohio State believes that. But having that, kind of monkey off your back type of thing, I think would be a big boost for them. While we're hearing that, I think we should also point out a guy like Shea Patterson last year didn't hear until April 26th about his eligibility at Michigan. And I think they've streamlined the process a little bit more a year later. I think also the legal team that both Shea Patterson and Justin Fields has, it's the same guy, probably know a little bit more. So they're able to get the right paperwork in and whatnot. But, that would not be a situation I think Ohio State wants to be in, is going into the summer still having questions about whether or not he'll be eligible, regardless of how confident they are. But I think that would be big. I think it's very clear, given that Tate Martell is gone now, that Justin Fields is QB1, and Matthew Baldwin, while obviously still in the mix, and if he does some great things in the spring, maybe he makes that competition a little bit tighter. But Justin Fields didn't come here to not play. Like you said, I think he was probably pretty confident. I do think it's interesting. I saw this a lot on social media yesterday. If he's not eligible with what happened at Missouri yesterday, do they look at a Kelly Bryant as maybe a guy who could come in? I think that this will be settled before that, given what we're hearing. But I saw a lot of people questioning on Twitter, would Ohio State go after him as a depth guy? I don't think Kelly Bryant would be interested in coming here and sitting behind Justin Fields for his end of college. But if we hear for some reason that Justin Fields isn't going to be eligible, is that somebody that they try and go after? I was never a huge Kelly Bryant fan. I think Justin Fields is considerably a better quarterback, but he is an experienced guy if push comes to shove and they need somebody if things don't go their way. But everything we're hearing, Justin Fields should be fine. The sooner the better, though, in my mind, in terms of getting that settled and letting him, kind of put that to rest and just focus on being Ohio State's starting quarterback in 2019.
A couple more quick things. We'll get you out of here, Patrick. It's going to be a big day on Wednesday. Obviously, Wednesday is signing day. Ohio State's still waiting to hear what's going to happen with Doug Nestor, DeJuan Jones, maybe another prospect. But so that's going to be a big deal on Wednesday. And then for me and Patrick and Steve Hellwagon and all the guys on the beat and gals on the beat, it's a huge day on top of that because we get to interview Ryan Day for the first time in a while. And for the first time period, we're going to be able to interview most of the new assistant coaches, all of the new assistant coaches, at least most of them. So Wednesday is going to be a huge day. I'm excited about it. You can hear it in my voice. Interviewing all the new coaches like Mike Yursich and Jeff Halfley and Greg Madison, Al Washington, all these guys. It's going to be really, really cool. And to hear Ryan Day, his tales from, just beating the heck out of the concrete on the recruiting trail these last few weeks. But Wednesday is going to be huge, Patrick. Just talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to the new defensive assistant coaches. I think that's obviously the biggest storyline this offseason, other than Justin Fields, is how do you fix this defense? And obviously Ryan Day thought that the coaches here were not getting the job done. He brought in his new guys. I think the fact that he went and got two Michigan coaches speaks volumes. Obviously a guy like Al Washington made a lot of sense, being a Columbus native and, a son of a former player and whatnot. But, what made them go after Greg Madison? What made Greg Madison want to cross the border and come to Columbus? How are they going to line up? What's their defensive scheme going to be? I had somebody ask me about that the other day. These coaches don't seem to be, including Jeff Halfley, who's obviously been in the NFL the last handful of years, don't seem to fit necessarily the press man scheme that they've run here since Chris Ash came back in 2014. These players have been coached one way, especially in the secondary. How do you adjust? How are you planning to change that? How do you teach these guys something so different if they are going to go away from it? So I think that's very interesting. How kind of they're handling the defensive line. Obviously, Larry Johnson's still the defensive line coach, but Greg Madison and Al Washington both have experience coaching defensive line. Are they going to be helping him with that? And then, you have a secondary coach, a passing and running game coordinator, that's different than the way Urban Meyer handled things. Ryan Day kind of assembling the staff or titling them in a more NFL kind of fashion. So just a lot of different storylines there, I think, is going to be very interesting. Just talking to these guys too, obviously getting to know them a little bit, and kind of hearing their first experiences at Ohio State will be very interesting, I think. On top of the normal signing day stuff, which has died down a little bit since we have the early signing period, but still some interesting storylines on that side of things. So Wednesday's a big day for Ohio State just in general, and obviously us getting the chance to talk to these guys will be even better.
A must-win game for the basketball Buckeyes tomorrow, to say the least. High noon at the Shot. Rutgers coming to town. Ohio State's trying to even the season series with Rutgers. I hate to even say that. That's when things started to go wrong. They lost to Michigan State. It's like, okay, no big deal. Then they go on the road. They lose to Rutgers, and that's when things started to snowball. So obviously a must-win. I still feel like this team is NIT bound. Some people, when I say that's like, oh, I don't think they're even good enough to make the NIT. They're good enough to make the NIT.
Yeah.
And I'm not ruling out them making the NCAA tournament, because if they can finish 10-10 in the Big Ten, which I don't think they're going to do, but if they do, I think they might make the NCAA tournament. But just your thoughts on this game against Rutgers tomorrow. Obviously a must-win with Ohio State sitting there at 3-6 in the Big Ten.
Absolutely, especially coming off the Michigan game the other night. I didn't think they would win the Michigan game. I thought they could keep it close. If you went back and looked at Michigan's schedule, there's very few Big Ten games that they've blown teams out. And so I figured Ohio State, especially once they got off to the good start, would at least hang in the game, and they did not. And things got out of hand. Obviously the technicals, Caleb Wesson remained on the bench for several minutes and didn't come back to the game at all after that. How he responds on Saturday will be interesting. He's obviously been frustrated all of the month of January, whether it was foul trouble or inconsistent play. They need him to play well. And they just need these senior, these guards, some of their older players. We saw Andre Wesson step up and have one big game, but they need these older players to show what they're made of. Not only, skill wise, but mentally too. This has been a tough stretch. We talked to CJ Jackson after the game up at the Chrysler Center, and he handled all the questions really well about is this a spiral, those type of things. But it needs to show on the court. Rutgers is a team that they're more than capable of beating. I think they lost by 3 when they went to New Jersey. So yeah, like you said, this is a must-win game, and I think you need to kind of instill some confidence. The Nebraska game helped a little bit, but then you come back and have this blowout loss at Michigan, and that kind of erases all that. So you've got a stretch here in February where there are some definite winnable games. If you're going to make that push and get to, like you said, 10-10 in the Big Ten or something, it's got to start on Saturday, and you've got to have a pretty good February as you head into March. I do think there are enough games on this team's schedule, if they can get 1 or 2 upsets and win the games that they're supposed to, that the NCAA tournament isn't out of the question at all. Like you said, I think right now, more than likely, if I had to put money on it, I'd say probably not making the tournament, but there is the opportunity there. So you got to take care of business against the teams that you're supposed to beat, though, and that starts on Saturday.
Great stuff as always from Patrick Murphy. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you to all listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Let's hear that Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.